Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to give you another amazing video on Track Bros channel. This is Sean here, and today we're going to be talking about the budget supercar option. Now, a budget supercar can be pretty much summed up with one slogan: the poor man's hero car. Ever since I was a little kid, I've been watching, a lot of car content. I grew up with the Acceleracers TV series on Teletoon back then. I grew up with obviously going to car meets every Tuesday, checking out the Corvette guys, the Mustang guys, the old Mopar guys. Because back then the new Chargers and such didn't really have a tuning community yet. And obviously the JDM community. And I just grew up, watching these cars, beautiful cars, on the parking lot. And I remember very, very distinctly one of my first experiences with actually like wanting a car was when Tokyo Drift just came out. And I saw a couple clips of it, and I saw this clip where, the main character, I forget his name, pulls up in a parking lot with this beautiful Veilside body kitted RX-7. And I honestly didn't know what it was. Later on in my life, I knew it was a kit car. I just didn't understand what it was underneath yet. I thought it might have been like a British kit car or something like that. It kind of looked like a Lotus Exige from the front for me, which kind of gave that illusion. But I still, to this day, it's still, every time I see it, I get flabbergasted, because that's what I want. I want a car that is mine, that every time I pull up, it's a unique car that I built, that I know everything about it. And, not that many people actually get to live that kind of dream. And today I'm going to basically sum up some potential candidates that I'm considering, but also stuff that I think you guys can learn from, potential options you guys could look at, especially in the budget range. Because obviously we could talk about all day, how we could build our own supercar firm and start building our own, Gordon Murray T50 cars, but this time with a V16 or whatnot. But at the end of the day, if it's not useful to you, if it's not going to be useful to you in the future, something that you could actually afford, then there's no reason to talk about it. So let's talk about that today. So, why get a supercar and how to get a supercar? These are really the two big questions that might come up right away. Right now, you might be a little stressed, like, I don't think I can afford a Veilside RX-7. How am I going to be able to get something as nice as that? And I'll talk about it right away. So, really, what we're going to be looking at, a lot of these cars are going to be tuner cars, or cars that you need to tune on your own with supercar-like performance. That's really what it's going to end up being, although we're going to look at some traditional supercars and some stuff that still has some of the characteristics of a supercar. So if you guys didn't know, really the three things that make a supercar amazing is, firstly, is the performance. Secondly, is the luxury and convenience and prestige that comes with the supercar. And thirdly, the actual value of the supercar, which is usually floating or slightly appreciating. These are the three attributes of a supercar. You could really think of it like a house on wheels. You buy it as a kind of like a mortgage deal, knowing that later on it will appreciate, and you get to appreciate it while it's appreciating. That's really the whole gist of the supercar market nowadays. Now, some standards that I'm going to put in right away, and this is specifically in the performance department, because this could be kind of hard to really put your finger on what makes a supercar, right? And here we're going to go straight up. So originally, really, we could say any car that had over 500 horsepower. Sometimes they were, 450 horsepower, but usually it was over 500 horsepower where you would talk about them as they were supercars. But nowadays, we're more so interested in the acceleration, because, again, 500 horsepower out of, 5,000 pound car, it just doesn't really do it for us. So, we could simplify it to about 6.5 pounds per horsepower. That's kind of like a nice golden ratio. Some of the cars we're going to be looking at, especially some more GT-like cars, are going to be a little higher than that, maybe closer to 7.3. But to give you guys a pretty good understanding of how much that is, well, Ford Mustang GT, the Performance Pack 2 variant, had about 8.4 pounds per horsepower. So when we're talking about 6.5 pounds, it's actually quite low. I believe I got this number out of a Porsche Carrera GT, which is very lightweight and an amazing sounding V10 manual supercar. And one of the classics. If you think about supercar, this one might be the one you pull out of your head. Some of them are obviously a little higher than that. So for instance, I looked at the Lexus LFA, which again pretty much the same recipe, with some major differences, but obviously kind of in the same segment, and that one was closer to 7.3. So I believe that 6.5 is pretty good, but if it's a little higher than that, that's okay too. The second portion is obviously super sports ergonomics. Now that's the steering feel, steering ratio, the seating, and the front visibility. Being able to see the front is very important. Being able to see the back, not so important. If you got the engine in the back, that's okay. And then thirdly is to have some sort of like points deduction for anything that feels more like a GT. So for instance, if you built like a GT500, brand new GT500, well, that's very close to supercar acceleration, but because it has that GT feeling inside and out, and it has some of the comfortability that you would expect out of like a Mercedes or a BMW, then it does deduct quite a lot of points. And you will see that in some instances it's more than just a little bit, it's quite a lot. So another aspect is that it has to be exhilarating feeling. When you're driving this car, it has to be exhilarating. And what I mean by that is that we could completely deduct any Tesla out of this category. That's pretty much what it means. When you're driving a Tesla, it is quite fast, but it has a lot of what you would consider a supercar. So for one, ergonomics are, they don't exist. For two, the interior is terrible. Like, we don't have to mention that. It's just plastics, really just plastics. There's no leather anymore. And three, it has not even a GT feeling. It really has a utility feeling. And yeah, it's very fast and straight line. But once you get corners and things like that, it's horrible. It drives like a Toyota, really. So that's why you cannot put this in the list. And finally, it's also the feeling of having your cake and eating it too. Having the looks of a proper sports car and actually being able to hustle it in the corners and drive it like it should, right? Steer it where it needs to go, and you don't have to have too much correction. So for instance, some of the muscle car guys, they'll have 700-800 horsepower out of their 8.1 liter engine, but because they can't really turn a corner or they can't really do what they want to do with to drive the engine anywhere they want to go, then it's kind of that feeling of like, you have your cake, but you got to kind of leave it in the fridge. So that's that. And another aspect is that you need to be able to park your car and look at the back of it and say, man, that is a beautiful car. It doesn't matter if it's mine or someone else's. That's a beautiful car. It's elegant. So the categories of selection. Here we're really going to be looking at a Trinitarian perspective of supercars. There are really three kinds of supercars. There are some that are entirely pure, and this is pure of the experience, the exhilaration, and so on and so forth. The second one is cars that have that GT-ness into them. Yes, they're pure, but for the most part, you could turn off a knob or slow down a little bit, and you'd still have a bit of that luxury and that comfort that you would expect in something more of a GT. And finally, the utility factor. Yes, you get a pure experience, but sometimes you sacrifice cargo space. And yes, you could get the GT experience, but sometimes you sacrifice also cargo space for the engine. So the utility factor is the idea of making the wife happy driving it around, being able to drive your kids around it as well. And really, in my opinion, if you were to take this as a Trinity symbol, let's say a triangle, there are some cars that are going to be in the middle, and we're not even going to talk about them in this video. So for one, you got those beautiful, large, exotic sedan wagons. So the Porsche Panamera Turbo S is one I think about. Another one is the V10 RS6s, which had the twin turbo V10. These were incredible on the track, and you have a bunch of those that I don't really consider in this list, not because they're particularly bad, but because they're very expensive, and also they do everything a little too well. Actually, you don't get that supercar feeling anymore when you're driving it around. But obviously, this is like a bucket list car. I absolutely need a Panamera in one day. Another one is the CTS-V, and pretty much any of the Cadillac Vs. I only talk about them a little bit, but obviously these are incredible. Like they're sedan ZL1s, right? They're just incredible muscle cars that somehow made it with bigger tires and a little bit better suspension to make some incredible lap times on the Nürburgring. And it really started with the STSV, but the CTSV2 is one that you can never discount in any argument. Anyone talking to you about some of the best cars ever built, I mean the CTS V2 was straight up there, one of the highest peaks. And finally, people that will argue that you get a big muscle car and then you just make that pig, make that pig dance on the track, and that's good enough. So for instance, a Dodge Charger Hellcat, get big wide body, get some really big tires, 300, 400 centimeter tires, and then get a huge wing in the back, and that would do you for forever. And yeah, there's definitely an argument for that. I'd love to drive something like that on the daily basis, but you're not going to get that ground clearance you might want out of a supercar driving in B roads and things like that. And generally speaking, you're going to sacrifice all that utility that you got out in the first place. So you can't really put that in this category or in this list. It would just be a boring list. We could go on and on about what kind of modifications you could do to a Golf Rabbit or whatnot. So we're gonna cut that out right now. So let's start really with the traditional supercars. Now these are pretty much in the pureness category, but they're kind of high in the price range. So we're just gonna kind of like cut them in right away and then not speak of them again. So really the number one there is the Lamborghini Gallardo, the 5.0 liter. This is the first generation Gallardo, and this one has the looks of a supercar and the feeling of the supercar. You got the engine and things like that, but it really fails in terms of the performance category. It just wasn't really all that fast, and there's not really much performance wise that you could do about it. And these can be found for around 50 to 60 grand. And that really depends where you are, but this is in the States. And they're okay, they're acceptable. There used to be a manual that you could get out of them. They're kind of rare now, they're going up in price and things like that. Generally speaking, they're for the looks. One version or variant of the Gallardo, chassis was excellent was the Audi R8 V8. Now the Audi R8 V8, firstly the V8 is really just a delineation of the later 5.2 V10. They have pretty similar blocks and things like that, pretty much the same engine otherwise. And the 4.2 V8 is an excellent engine to make a lot of power. These are very cheap. They're a little cheaper than even the Gallardos in some cases, around 50 to 60, sometimes 40 grand. And they can be found with a manual quite easily. And these are really the last of the gated manuals out of the Lambos and the Ferraris. So they're really, really nice and currently very underappreciated. Some people have considered going to Europe and importing them in, but these are so nice that it's really not a big deal to try to do that. The prices are just too nice right now, but obviously in the future it might be kind of nice to get them from Europe because they're a little cheaper there. Now one thing you could do with the R8 V8 that might make it a little bit more exotic than just getting the Gallardo or getting just a vanilla Audi, which is still a little slow by the way, is to actually put in a twin supercharged system on your R8 V8. Now these are only about 10 to 11 grand, probably around 14 grand total to do the whole transaction. And they look amazing and they sound amazing and they are a ton of power. We're talking about 800 horsepower plus out of an all-wheel drive manual supercar. So that's probably a really good idea if you want a traditional supercar to get an R8 V8 and then get a manual. Now some of the cons with the R8, in my opinion, I think the front looks really horrid. It just didn't really age all that well. I also associate it with Marvel because of Iron Man having this car, and to be honest, in my opinion, it actually deducts points. Like when I was a kid, I wanted an R8 because it was an Iron Man car, but now I just find it too ugly because of that. I have that association done there. Now, if you did want to pay a little bit more money and get more of that Lambo experience, I think the 5.2 Gallardo, the second gen, is an amazing car to start with, and you can make a lot of power with that supercharger that you can see right down there. Um, these ones will make closer to 750 horsepower, but you can rear-wheel drive swap the Lambo, and there you go. You got an absolute beast. And in my opinion, in that cocaine white, I think it's just a dream car for me. Whenever I think about, mansion, beautiful women, and a nice parking lot, the first car I think about is a cocaine white Lamborghini Gallardo. I don't know why. I'm sure if I was a little older, it'd be a Countach. But that's pretty much it for the traditionals here. I think there's a couple more. Yes, so if you are not interested in the Lambos or the Audis, I would consider getting a McLaren. So right now, the 12C is sub 90 grand, which is quite a bit cheaper than a R8 or a Gen 2 Gallardo. And for the 12C, that's very good. You get a twin turbo V8. That sounds amazing. You get dual clutch transmission, of course, and they were much faster than even the Gallardos of the time. So it might be a very nice budget idea for you guys. If you want something a little nicer, in my opinion, the 570S makes a lot of sense and is a direct competitor to the Gallardo too. It's a little bit more expensive at 110 grand, but all things considered, it's a newer car than the Gallardo, and it's cheaper. And again, what really separates these guys from the Gallardos and the Audis is that those ones you need to actually put on a supercharger or something to make more power, versus these ones will just do a chip tune with the turbos, and they sound amazing with the right exhaust. Turbo downpipe, boom. This thing sounds way better than most Gallardos on the road. So I think this is a pretty nice idea. Like if you want something alternative. Now obviously, these might not be as reliable as the Audi V10 engines. Sorry, my dog is groaning. But next up here is the purest of it pure. This is really the best deal you can have for a pure supercar experience. If you guys are low on budget and you're looking for something that you could put in your garage, buy up on Car Gurus or Auto Trader, or bring a trailer and then just bring it up to your house, put it in the garage, and go on B routes whenever you want to on the weekends, this is the one to get. I've been dreaming about this one since I was 15. This is the S1 or S2 Lotus Exige Cup replica cars. So these are incredible value. Here I found a Elise supercharged version, and they go for about 30 grand. So they're much cheaper than getting that Lamborghini Gallardo or that McLaren. And getting a Rev 400 TVS kit will cost you about 10 grand, and it will allow you to make a lot more boost. These are 300 wheel horsepower cars all day, and they weigh a lot less than the Gallardos. And again, about the same sizing as a Gallardo, but because they're so much lighter, you don't have to buy the big tires. They don't have the all-wheel drive system. They're very, very easy to work with, and they got the manual. The only negative with this thing is that you do get a 4-cylinder engine. Some people don't consider that quite as exotic as the V10, but what's great about it is that you get the supercharger whine right out the factory. On top of that, with a big supercharger, I mean, these sound amazing. And you get the manual, but you also get 8,000 RPM 4-cylinder. So these sound just as good as your S2000s and things like that in a package that's a much lighter and just an amazing purist type of driving. Now, if you did want to get one of the big issues is that if you did get an Elise SC and you put a supercharger and things like that, it will definitely depreciate a little bit that car value. Another thing is that these have had many owners with the Toyota engines, very reliable, but again, they've had so many owners over their lifespan. Sometimes it's a little hard to consider that in the whole equation, and sometimes it just doesn't make that much sense. If you do want to get an actual exotic version of the Exige, the S240 is really the first one that made a lot of power, and that one is for about 50 grand. So it is kind of expensive for one of those ones that were untouched. And another one to consider in the future is the V6 model. So in the S2 and late S2 and S3, you got the actual Cup 300 plus models, which had your supercharged V6s. Now those ones will be a little bit more exotic in the the performance department, but a lot less exotic in the sounding department. I just find these V6s just don't sound so good. But obviously with a supercharger whine, that's totally fine. The Cup 380 made a lot of sense to me back when I was 15. They were about 45 grand euro, but nowadays they're very rare, so you got to be in the lookout for them. Now, another one in the purest of pure category, let's say you want a little bit more performance and you don't mind about spending a little bit more money. I believe the Noble M400 / the M12 series of Noble cars is an extremely good deal. These are a little bit wider than your Lotuses, but they're basically the same idea. This one is a tube chassis supercar that came out of Britain again, and this time they came with the twin turbo V6 Ford Vortec engine. Now this engine sounds a lot better than your regular Toyota GR engines, and in my opinion is one of the best sounding V6s, especially for like a name brand V6. Is one of the best. It's just as good as the Busso. It's got that kind of like crackling noise that you get, the tremble noise that you get out of your nice V6 sound. The biggest problem with this thing is that it's very rare. You only really get to see 3 or 4 of them on Bring a Trailer, but they are sub $60,000 cars, so that's a very good bargain deal in my opinion. Obviously very rare. That means that it's kind of hard to work on them, but because they're kit car, they're tube chassis, it's easier than what you might expect with a Bentley or a Mercedes, because again, everything is components that you can find, you could part out, and things like that. So this is something I consider a little bit better than your Lotus in some ways. Next up is something a little bit more extreme, and that's if you look at the M12 and you say, that's cool, but I don't like the engine, I don't like the chassis, I want to do it my own way. Now, instead of buying a whole company and doing it that way, I suggest looking at getting a proper kit car and building it up for your own pleasure. So you start off with going with one of the big companies. Here I have a couple of models. So the first one here is a Factory 5 Racing GTM, which looks like a Ford GT, kind of like a molded out Ford GT. The next one is a Superlight SLC Coupe. And these two companies will allow you to buy a kit car, whichever one you want. There's one that looks like a Shelby. There's one that looks like a McLaren F1 and things like this. And you buy it out, build it up, build up the tube chassis, choose your engine, choose your transmission, choose your wheels, whatnot, and then put up all the fiberglass on top of it. You get to build your interior, build your fuel system, build your electronics, etc., in your shed. And once you're done with it, you get to do whatever you want. And many companies have decided to buy these out and make their own track cars. Some companies will actually build it for you, so you don't have to worry about that. And really what makes a lot of sense for me is to get this kind of car and build up your own exotic engine that you want to. So for instance, I've thought about a high revving 5.5 liter Coyote. I've thought about getting a V12 LS engine in one of these. I thought about getting all sorts of funny shenanigans like a Vortec 8100, and I think it would be a great idea for someone that has a lot of time and a lot of money. Some of them will be sub 50 grand, but it depends really how much performance you want out of these and how exotic you want your engine to be. In my opinion, getting an exotic engine is what makes sense with these things. You could always make like a replica Ford GT or GT40, or a replica of F1, but really what makes sense is to do it your own way, so that it's Sean's car, it's the Track Bros car. Another cool idea I saw was getting a Ford RS200 Cosworth kit, which literally looks like a Ford RS200. This is one of the rarest Group B cars and one of the coolest Group P cars that you could ever buy, and they really give you everything 0 to 100 to build it pretty much to spec, and you get to choose your own 4-cylinder in this case. But again, the con is that it's extreme labor, especially with the RS200. There's a lot of these are really old forms, and to be honest, doing it on your own sometimes can be really, really tough, in especially the electrical and the fueling departments, in my opinion. And finally, building your own car from the ground up, you can mess up a lot of stuff, like the aero, the cooling, the brakes, and so on. And when you will go on the track or when you will go on the road, you'll have to make sure that all that stuff, all the licensing is done. And so that's pretty tough. So I would suggest this for really the toughest, the most aggressive of builders that really want a big challenge. Now we get into an interesting category. It's right between the kit cars and what we've seen earlier, the Lotuses and M12s. This is buying a race car and then putting it as road legal. So here we have the Ferrari Challenge Series. So this is a 360 Modena Challenge. You can also buy a F430. Actually, I think it might be an F430. And these ones have the amazing V8s. They're usually ITB'd. They got straight pipe exhaust. You don't really have to worry about that. And you get your dual clutch, sometimes manual transmissions. And these things, it only takes a handful of mods to make them road legal, and then afterwards you just look like a boss. Like, these are much cooler than getting like a F430 Scud. Like, the Scud has nothing on this thing. Even like a 458 doesn't have anything on a challenge race car road legal. Although it would be pretty cool to get a racer car like that, especially Ferrari, on the road. They start up to be pretty expensive. They haven't made them in quite some years. When I was younger, I think 16, 18, these were closer to 30 grand, but now they're going up in price because of, auctions and so on. And so you'll get them around 70 grand, sometimes a little more. So if you want something a little cheaper and you don't really care about that Ferrari nameplate, who cares? It's a race car on the road. I think getting a NASCAR stock car will make a lot of sense for you. So right here we got a nice, I believe it's a Chevrolet NASCAR stock car. And really what's cool about the NASCARs is that firstly 700 horsepower, you can't beat that. Sometimes 850 horsepower, and very high revving V8. I believe it's some sort of like small block Chevy based V8 nowadays, and so you get a lot of parts that you could build up. Manual 4-speed transmission, just an absolute beast. But obviously that can be a problem on highways and things like that. But really, the bread and butter thing here is it's a stock car on the road. That's crazy. I don't think a lot of people have seen that. Now, finally, let's say you're even cheaper and you don't really care about all the amenities. Who cares about 2 seats? Who cares about, big V8 engine? I don't care about that stuff. I just want to really go really fast in corners and not really worry about building up some sort of kit car. I just want to buy something out. Well, now I would suggest going into the Legend Cup Racing series. So this is a Legend Cup, and you'll notice right away it looks like a Ford Super V8 coupe car, but in reality it's a fiberglass kit car that a lot of racers have built up to basically have their own little NASCAR races. These are usually like little oval races or mud races, and what happens is they sell these for really cheap. They'll literally trade you for a Miata, and they have really cool engines. I believe it's some sort of like Hayabusa Suzuki engine, 1300 cc's, that make a lot of power for what they are, about 110 horsepower for a 1,500 pound car. So these make a lot of sense if you're just looking for like fun on the back roads, and you are kind of able to get through with the licensing. Either you do it outlaw, or you have some friends in the licensing. You could do that really quickly. I think this would make a lot of sense for you. Although you would sacrifice the manual transmission, they only have it sequential. So now let's go to a traditional supercar killer. This is again, budget supercar, so you'd expect this on the list right away. It's a Nissan GTR. Now, I would suggest getting something 2009 plus. That's when they started having your 520 horsepower packages on there. The 2008 is an okay model year to get, but the 2009 plus, you get the black edition that has the bigger turbos and the more cooling. This is the mythology here, but some people have said that it's true. So really what makes the GTR really cool is that it's a Lego Build-A-Monster. You start off with this 500 horsepower car, and you're able to switch out the turbos. Here I have AMS performance packages listed out, but there's multiple companies that will give you everything you need to do for the engine to make more power. Most of the time you don't need to do anything else to the car. Putting on better wheels, a little bit of aero if you want to, and you have a supercar killer right away. These will do 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds out the gate. The later versions would do it in 3 seconds, which killed everything on the field at that time. And even today, some of these are much faster than most Teslas on the road. So that's just kind of the idea of getting a GTR. It's really one of the first supercar killers of our generation, and it's incredible that they're still making them today. I'm still very happy that they're making them, because that means that for us, budget supercar owners, we can buy one out of the factory if we really wanted to. So that's really cool. So now let's get into some pure but with some GT-ness cars. So really, the first one I think about right away is the Ferrari. So Ferrari, what you're trading off here is well, a couple things. The first thing you're trading off is the performance. It's obviously less performance than some of the other cars on the list. I believe it's not even in the acceleration categories we were talking about earlier. And you're also trading a lot of the reliability and the tunability that you would get with a lot of these other cars, especially the Exige. Forget about it. The Exige is much faster than this. But with the Ferrari F430s and 360 Modenas, what you get is the bread and butter Ferrari experience. Rear engine, rear wheel drive, a flappy paddle gearbox. Yes, it's not the best one that they ever made, but again, high revving V8 and really good sounds out of that V8. And that's what a lot of people are just looking for in this budget supercar category. So I believe that if you're looking for something on the budget side, the 360 Modena makes a lot of sense. It's a sub $60,000 supercar that's fairly reliable. You could go with 355, but they're getting a little expensive now. The 348s are a little too old and just don't make the power. So the 360 makes a lot of sense. Now, if you want something a little nicer, I think the F430 could make a lot of sense, especially the Scuderia. If you could find a scooter or like a cheap Scuderia, that'd be pretty cool. And these are sub 90 grand, so they're kind of expensive now, but they are still cheaper than your second gen Gallardos, your Audi R8s sometimes. And so in that way, it can kind of make sense. But again, the Gallardo, you could buy a Gallardo 5.2, put a supercharger on it, and you're still only like 20-30 grand more than an F430. And you're going to be making 700 horsepower. So that's kind of where it doesn't make sense going with Ferrari here. But I wanted to, show off that at least you could get it. Now, another really good pick, and this one I think is a classic pick, is getting a Porsche 996 or 997. Now, specifically, I think a GT3 or a GT2 replica would make a lot of sense. These are around 50 to 70K, and they're really just usually Carrera S with the 3.8 or the 3.6, and manual transmission, rear-wheel drive, and they have a couple of mods that make them kind of high revving. You get the wing, you get the front bumper, and sometimes the interior is gutted out, which is kind of cool. So really what you're getting here is a pure car that just so happens to be a Porsche, so it's actually kind of nice to drive on the road. Now, at around 50 to 70K, you will expect to getting like an actual GT3. You could spend a lot less and get a replica, like a full replica, but what I think is smart is getting a 996 GT3 that has been raced or so on and so forth, and then modifying it a little bit to make it a little bit more reliable so you could drive it on the road. And what's really nice is the 996s and 997s are going way up in value. When I was growing up, they were around 40 grand, and now they're hitting 70 grand. So you do know that they're going to keep going up just because they're so rare, and they keep making more GT3s. So there's not that many reasons to buy the old ones except if you want to collect them. But right now, they still make a lot of sense if you're looking for an investment in something that you could drive around. Very reliable cars. So now we're going to go into the Super GT category. So instead of looking at pureness with some GT-ness, we're just going to look at the pure GTs. So I think the number one pure GTs you should look into, and this is because of all the advantages you get out of them, is the Chevrolet Corvette versus the Dodge Viper. Now these are two of them these are really the main two GTs that we have here in the States and Canada. And they make a lot of sense because they have such a wide range of budgets. They have such a wide range of modifications. And finally, they have such a wide range of applications. You will see them in quarter mile times. You'll see them on highways. You'll see them in country club parking lots. Versus, like, let's say a 360 Modena, you will only really see in country club parking lots and maybe your cars and coffee shows. They're just not made for that performance. Versus these GTs are 100% made out of that performance, and you know what you're getting out of these out the factory. So in the sub 20 grand category, I think the Chevrolet Corvette C5 Z06 makes a lot of sense for most people. It's the lightest Z06. That's really the gateway here. It's the lightest Z06. They have some of the coolest engines is 5.7 LS6, which has the best flowing Gen 3 LS head. The only head that really matches it or goes a little beyond is the LS3 head, which flowed a bit better out of the Gen 3s and Gen 4s. And the LS6 made a ton of power if you did supercharge them at the time. Now, obviously, nowadays the the C6, later C6, the LS3s and the LS7 heads will be quite a bit better for making a lot of power, but the LS7s are a little unreliable, and the LS3s are still quite a bit more expensive. In the sub 35 grand category is where you can really start touching Vipers, but also you get the C6s. So the C6 Grand Sport is a wide body it's a Z06 styled wide body with the LS3 engine. This is the one to get if you're looking for a cheap budget Corvette that has everything supercar, everything GT you might want. This one with the LS3, you can make a ton of power with just a cam and a slight tune, and they will be very reliable on the road. Versus if you want to get into Vipers, really the main aspect of getting into Vipers is that it's a much more insane experience. That's really the best way to say it. The original Vipers are not necessarily fast. They're about 450 horsepower, but they have the growling V10. And with just a couple of mods, these things can start pushing 600, 700 horsepower, no problem. You put it on big fat tires, and they're they're Hot Wheels on the road, really. And the RT10 is really the first one to look into. And I think that this one is one of the coolest ones to also get into. I would personally buy this one. You can get them with so firstly, they're target top, but they do not have a fixed roof. They have a friggin' carpet roof. So you can just take off the roof, rip it off, and then just go flying. So that's a pretty cool thing. They have side exhaust for the first gen and the second gen, and then the third gen they put them in rear exhaust. This is when they started selling the RT10s with the Gen. I think it was the Gen 4, Gen 4 Vipers, which is the same gen as this one right here, the ACR. So these are a little bit more for the unwise, let's say. They will go up in value, which is the cool part about them. But the thing that's not so nice is that you do have to tune them a lot before they're like as versatile as the C6 GS and the C5 Z06 even. So in that way, do you really want to get into a Viper? I don't know. Personally, I do, because I think that they're really, really cool at the extreme, and they just make, those beautiful V10 noises. Now, in the higher categories, you could buy a so you can buy a C6 Z06 at around 35 grand, but at that range, you will get a pretty broken engine, and that will cost you about 20 grand to replace. So to get a nice C6 Z06, it'll cost you around the price of an SRT10 Viper. So the SRT10s are the ones that were pretty much, you would call it a Gen 2 body, but it's actually a Gen 4, I believe. With that one, you get, with the C6 Z06, you get the 7-liter V8, which in my opinion is way better than most of the V10s, the Viper V10s. But after this SRT10, the later ones, they do make a lot of power such that I think they're nicer. Now the problem is that actually the C6 Z06 pretty much undercuts the Vipers by about 20 grand. They start about 40 grand, and then they go up to 55 grand if you want a really, really nice example, versus the Vipers that really start at 60 grand to get kind of competitive. At around 60 grand, you can start looking at some really nice examples of Gen 4s and Gen 5s, and some later Gen 6s and things like that. The really newest 2013 plus Vipers that looked beautiful and made that power, the 640 horsepower that you expect out of V10s. Now, really, the big thing that makes the V10s incredible is they take the boost very easily. You can supercharge them, turbocharge them pretty easily, and they'll make 2,000 horsepower, no problem. And that way, they make a lot of sense for most people. The thing is that most people will want to supercharge or turbocharge, but they won't want to touch the engine. And that's when the C6 01 makes a lot of sense. These are about 70 grand, so they're just over what you might expect a nice Viper to go for. And the 01, the thing is, it's like, they're going to go up in value. There's no question about them. They didn't really make that many, and they're supercharged. They're essentially souped up LSA engined Z06s, and in that way, it's one of the most special C6s they ever made. Obviously, the Z06 in a lot of ways has pretty much everything the ZR1 would have, but the difference is that the ZR1 comes stock already set up for a bigger supercharger. And so some people put GT500 superchargers on them. Some people put TVS, 2650s or Hellcat superchargers, and they start making a lot of boost, 800 horsepower, 900 horsepower. And that's where really I think the Corvettes and the Vipers are different from all the other GTs. And what makes them super GTs is that they will make 1,000 horsepower reliably and really take your breath away whenever you push the throttle. That's really the cool thing about them. Finally, in this category, I think going 60 plus, what you're looking at is either getting a Viper ACR or a C7 Z06. These are really the two big boys that you're going to be looking at. Now, there are some ideas for if you do want to go C7. There's different trains of thought. So the first thing is that getting into Gen 5 Chevys are kind of hard to tune. Much harder than getting an LS6 or getting a Grand Sport, C6 Grand Sport. But the advantage is that you're going to start with a lot more horsepower, so you won't really worry about it. And when you do start tuning it up, you'll get a bit better gas mileage, but mostly you'll get huge gains out of really simple stuff. So like a simple cam will give you 550 wheel horsepower versus a cam with the Gen 3s and Gen 4s will only really give you, close to, just under 500 wheel horsepower. So we're talking about over 50 horsepower wheel gain, and pretty much everything else will be stock, and it'll take it because with the Z06 wide body, especially Z06 and Grand Sport, again, it just takes that power better on the road, and you won't be squirming around like a stock C5 Z06 will do it. So I believe the C7 Z06 is really for that guy that's looking for that kind of Ferrari-esque look of the car, and he doesn't really care so much about that depreciation. The C7s will definitely start depreciating in the next couple of years, not like the ZR1s, not like the C6 Z06s either, because the C7 Z06, in my opinion, has the most amount of long-term reliability issues, whether it's the supercharger, whether it's the push rods, whether it's the direct injection engine. Now, with the Viper, you will have the opposite problem. You will get the car, it won't have any problems. It won't depreciate, it'll actually appreciate in value, but the problem is that you won't be able to drive them as much because they're way scarier to drive, in my opinion. Even making 700 horsepower with a Viper, it's way scarier than making 900 horsepower with a Corvette. They just take the power differently, and they're really balls to the wall cars. So if that's really your bread and butter, you want something balls to the wall, you were thinking of building that SLC coupe, but in reality you don't want to build it, you just want to track it, then I think getting a Viper would make a lot of sense for you. But if you're someone that's kind of more interested in getting that day-to-day experience with your Corvette, I think that a C7, pretty much any of the Corvettes will make sense to you, but I think the C7 Z06 is crown jewels, versus the ZR1 is more someone that's trying to collect. And then if you're just trying to absolutely pwn the engine, but also build it up properly, RT10, C6 GS makes a lot of sense. C6 Z06 makes a lot of sense if you're trying to track it, but you don't need all that power. You need kind of stockish car. And the C5 Z06 if you're really low on budget, but then eventually you do want to build it up. That's pretty much the logic here. Generally speaking, the Corvette is better value, but the Viper is way cooler. Another classic Super GT here, and this will be Ferrari. Ferrari really makes the ultimate 2+2 cars, and this is part of their history. It's ingrained in their history, but the problem is that most of them are very expensive. Think of the 812 Superfast, the F12, and the 599 even. None of those are actually an unobtainium. Most people won't even see them on the road most of the time. I'm lucky that I've seen even 4 or 5 of them. So this is the budget Ferrari 2+2. It's probably the only V12 Ferrari you'll ever be able to afford, and this thing is the Ferrari 612 Scaglietti. The Scaglietti is a true 2+2. It's got actual rear seats, not like the 812 or the F12 or so on. And what makes it special is you get the 5.7 V12, you get the elongated chassis, but you pay sub 360 Modena pricing. This thing will be sub 70 grand, in some places sub 50 grand, and in very specific places, I won't even mention them, but sub 50 grand is doable with these 612 Scagliettis, and they're incredible to drive. Watching a couple of videos, you kind of get that impression that you're in that cabin for the engine experience. The intake goes into the cabin and you can hear it right away. You know, the transmission is garbage and it's not necessarily the fastest thing on the road. It's definitely not in that acceleration range that we were talking about. But what makes it special is you're never going to find another Ferrari V12 the same price as this. So I'd definitely be on the lookout to this thing. In my opinion, it's the ugly duckling of the Ferraris, but looking at the right angle and so on and so forth, you can see a little bit of 599, which makes it really pretty. I think the biggest problem with this car is the wheel wells. I think the wheel wells were way too big for the tiny wheels, and they really didn't know what to do with the suspension geometry to, you know, mask that largeness of the car. It is quite a bit larger than the previous model, which was the 550 and the 575, and they definitely fixed it in the later versions of the car. But because it is an ugly duckling, I think it will actually appreciate quite a bit if you do buy it today. And this will be in my garage eventually. Eventually, if they keep their value, if they keep depreciating. But yes, the interior is extremely Ferrari. Everything is leather. You get that yellow tachometer, and you're never going to get it like this. You're just never going to get it like this. This is something you got to look for. Another Super GT I would consider, and this is kind of in the same vein as earlier, is getting a Porsche 996 Turbo. Now, earlier I was talking about GT3s and so on and so forth, and I was saying how pure they are and things like that, and it's true. The GT3s are great. They're excellent value for that kind of person, the pure person that's looking for a Lambo, but a little bit less, you know, police grabber. With the Super GTs, what you're really looking for is something a little bit more planted. You're not really looking to gut out the car, but you're really looking for something that you can go really fast on the highway. And I think this is an ultimate feelings car, really. It looks amazing. It's got the engine. The turbos spool up very quickly, and it's generally very fast. I mean, this is around 420 to 480 horsepower with the X18 package, and they're sub 45 grand. So getting into one is a no-brainer for a lot of people. You know, not as no-brainer as maybe a Ferrari V12. I mean, you're just never going to get one otherwise. You're too much of a plebeian. This thing will likely appreciate, but it'll be much slower, and most likely it'll only be the special editions, the X18s, things like that. I would argue that really what makes this cool is it's the only Porsche tuner. And what I mean by this is that you can buy this car for 45 grand, buy a 12 grand package for bigger turbos, plop them on, get a couple of things done, and boom, you got a 700 horsepower Porsche Turbo. They make a lot of sense for that kind of person, a person who wants like a budget roof CTR, and otherwise I think that they're pretty ugly, but they're growing on me very slowly, and I have definitely seen a lot of 911s on the road that looked a lot prettier, but I can't lie, that ducktail and spoiler combo, I think it looks great, and I would definitely have one if I could afford the tuning, of course. Now, let's say you got into this and you're really just thinking, like, supercar to you means pure luxury with some versatility in terms of what you could do every day. I think that you might be interested in a convertible then. And if you're interested in a convertible, well, then you have to get a Mercedes SL. Now, the SLs that are worth looking into are really AMGs, the SL55, 63, and the 65. Any of these three can be had for sub 30 grand if you're looking at the right place, and so on and so forth. And really, what makes them cool is that you don't have to tune them. They make all the power already. They make 600 pound-feet of torque with the 65. They make the 550 horsepower with the 63, and the SL65 is just in there because, quick supercharger swap, and you got 700 horsepower, just like every other, 55. If you know about the 55s, like crazy engines. Now, obviously, you get the unreliability of Mercedes, and some of the older ones, They're still on that Daimler Chrysler interior, which is just, dreadful. But if you've ever seen like an SL63 with, 22 inches wheels and, like 345 diameter wheels, I mean, you have to get one. You have to get one, right? Now, obviously, if you didn't want something that appreciated quite a lot more, you'd be getting an SL65 AMG with like a newer one, or potentially a black edition. But generally speaking, you're getting into this because you don't have the money for the other stuff. So I would suggest this thing, but just be careful. Have a mechanic on board with you that you're buying this. Now we're gonna get into the British cars. So the Brits have made a lot of cars, great cars, I would argue, but in this kind of list, I can't really name all that many. Yes, we had McLaren, but I haven't really named anything otherwise, and that's because a lot of their cars are kind of like underwhelming in terms of the acceleration, the pure acceleration. They're just not doing it. I like the Virage. I think the Virage is a really cool car. It's like an early 2000s 700 horsepower stock car, twin supercharged. Never heard of that in my whole life. And a manual at that. But I think the one that makes a lot of sense right now is the Aston Martin DB9. The DB9 had the V12. It made upwards of 500 horsepower about, and they're sub 50 grand. So that makes a lot of sense. The manual transmission is not always found at that price. You'll probably get an automatic or their semi-automatic transmission they had. And generally speaking, they have the looks. So that's really what's going on there. One of them that I've been looking at as well is the V12 Vanquish. I think the Vanquish is a little prettier, but the Vanquish is generally speaking more expensive. The Vanquish S might be something that we'll appreciate eventually, but with the DB9s, they've just been going down very slowly and surely. So I'm not quite sure which model to get with the DB9s, but I'm sure there's one that is the one to get, something that makes the most power, that is the rarest to get, and so on and so forth. Forget about the V8 Vantages. If they have V8 DB9s, forget about that. Forget about the DB7. All that stuff is, generally speaking, going to go down in value, and they just don't make the power. But the DB9s, I think, make the power, and they have the looks. Now, if you want something a little cheaper that is a British Grand Tourer, I think the Jaguar XKR makes a lot of sense. For one, look for the post facelift. Post facelift is this one right here. It's got the 5-liter supercharged V8. Yes, I know the Brits are saying to get the 4.2 supercharged because it's more reliable and so on. But the 5-liter supercharged, I think, makes the power numbers and has the sound like out of the factory. They're sub 35 grand, so you can't go wrong with them. The back of it is just perfect, much better than even the Aston Martin in my opinion. I think this thing is way prettier, and for sub 35 grand, I mean, I want one. Like I'd like to buy one. In Europe, they're about 12 to 13 euro grand, and I think that just makes perfect sense. Like no brainer, buy one right now. And also the interior is very good on this thing, much better than even the Mercedes, which is unheard of. I honestly thought British, the interior would be crawling, but actually it looks very good, and they're quite good interiors. They're not gonna like break on you and so on. So now we're gonna talk about this kind of like intersection category, which is the GTs for the family. So it's GT cars that have some utility, and right off the bat you're gonna look at me queer because you're gonna think, well, you took out the Panamera, but now you're putting in BMW. Like why are you doing this, and how? Well, for one, the Panamera is a lot more than the BMW series here. For two, the Panamera doesn't have that experience, that feeling that you get out of these two series of cars. And thirdly, I think these are actually going to appreciate quite a lot, while the Panamera is going to keep going down. So the ones I'm talking about here is specifically the E60 M5s, E60 M6s, and the later twin turbo V8 M6s. I don't think the twin turbo M5s are going to appreciate as much because they're still making them, but the M6s might. And some of the reasons why I think these are great is, well, for one, they're actual sedans. If you look here, we have this is a M5 E60 sedan, and what's really cool with this thing, it's a V10 6-speed manual. This thing is crazy. I think you should seriously consider getting one. This is I think it was a 30 grand one. And the only issue with the V10s, like people might tell you all a bunch of issues, but really the biggest thing is the crankshaft. Swapping out the crankshaft to something a bit better. Sometimes the crank sensors break, but that's pretty much all the BMWs. But generally speaking, just swapping out the crankshaft right when you buy it, and that's it. It's reliable as hell. I think that's a great car, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's not the best from the back, but from the front, it looks fine. It looks like modern BMW, and it's a V10, 500 horsepower. You can't really go wrong with that. If you want something with more power and that's a little cooler in like actually driving, in my opinion, would probably be the M6. So the M6, specifically the twin turbo V8, is very cool because it still has the manual and retains that. It's got a smaller engine, yeah, not super cool, but it's a twin turbo and it makes that torque. So the same torque that you would get out of Mercedes, but in a manual transmission. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And this is the Grand Coupe. The Grand Coupe has the 4 doors. It's a little wider, not much actually. It's just better for the kids. I think generally speaking, this is a GT for the family, and it's the first one of the list here. The second one here, and this is a little bit less utility because it's a 2 door, but the Maserati Gran Turismo S. Now this thing, I had to really look at the performance values that you're getting out of it because it's a little too heavy. It's a little too heavy for that acceleration that you would get with the the twin turbo V8 here, but it's similar enough to the V10 that I think you could put it in this category, and it's cheaper. It's a sub $30,000 car. Do get the Gran Turismo S because you're gonna regret it. It makes a little bit more horsepower than the regular, and it's got the F1 semi-automatic transmission, which is dreadful, but in the S it does shift quite fast. Just make sure you got a couple of spare clutches in your back room. Now another one that I've been considering, which I like but I don't think I could really put in this list because it's a little bit too much of a limo, is the Quattroporte. The Quattroporte gets the V8, but in some cases it gets the twin turbo V8. It makes a lot of power, about 600 horsepower. They're a bit too expensive, they're not depreciating as fast, and they're limo. They're way too wide, and because of just how expensive they are and depreciating, I just can't put it in the list. But again, the Gran Turismo, like I've seen landlords that drive this, like Cuban landlords and things like that. They love these. They're really cool, and I think they're really cool. I would get one with them if I wasn't limited to a track car. I'm the track bro, of course. So another one here, and this is very similar to the SL class, is the CL class and the S class coupe. So these are really cool because they're definitely going to go up in value. They got the best interior that Mercedes ever makes. Any year that you choose, it's got the best interior, and they're sub 30 grand, pretty much all of them. The CL class, you're usually going to get the 63, sometimes the 55, but sometimes you'll get the CL 65. So this is a CL 65. That one is right around 30 grand. It's a twin turbo V12. You can't go wrong. And they're a little bit more rigid and a little bit more comfortable inside than the convertible. They're also probably a little bit more nimble because, the structural rigidity and so on and so forth. The S-Class Coupe is another beast of its own. It's just great. It's fantastic. It's a little too heavy, but it's fantastic. It's got everything going for it, and it's much cooler than, in my opinion, the C-Class and the E-Class, because you do get like the luxury that you might expect out of it, and you do have the rear seats for your kids and things like that. It's not that crammed into them. The earlier CLs were pretty crammed, but once you get closer to the S-Class coupes, in terms of years, they're totally fine for most people. Now we're gonna go with another British category here. Is the GTs for the family, Bentleys. So, I might kind of break my rule here. I don't think Bentley has that kind of performance that you might expect with some other cars, but they have twin turbo W12s, which make all the torque. So the first one is the Bentley Continental Super Sport. This thing is a 670 horsepower beast, I believe, and sub 50 grand. You can't go wrong with it. It's just great. The interior is just wow. Like it aged like it was yesterday. Everything is aluminum. It's beautiful, and you got that German reliability that you wouldn't get with some other British cars. So that's kind of cool. If you want something a little cheaper that has basically the same amount of power, The Continental Flying Spur, and this is where I break the rule here. It's basically a limo, but you get that power that you would expect with the Continental Super Sport. So I don't know, it kind of fits in this category. Something tells me I got to tell you guys about this limo, because to be honest, if I knew about this when I was a kid, I would have bought one. This is baller, and nobody knows about it. So I think you guys should know about it. All right, now we're just gonna like quickly, rapidly finish this up because it's been an hour here. Um, the very last category I wanted to mention was the utility speedster. So these are really the cheapest cars you could buy because it's purely utilitarian. You get a car loan, like a 30 grand or 40 grand car loan, and you buy this thing, and then you just kind of soup it up to get that kind of performance. And it's still supposed to be very comfortable on a daily basis, but you could be able to, get in the car, start it up, 20 minutes later, be driving on B roads. That's kind of the idea here. I'm gonna move my screen. So really the big thing here is turbo. So Volkswagen Golf R Mark 7, that's a no-brainer. It's all-wheel drive, turbo, 2 liter, I believe, and they make quite easily 500 horsepower. So that's just no-brainer here. You just put a turbo kit and boom, big power hatchback. The Subaru WRX STI is also a very good pick. The later models, the ones they made just till recently, and basically building them as a Type RA model makes a lot of sense. So here we got a Type RA in this presentation right there. But pretty much buying a Subaru STI, rebuilding the engine, and then kind of gutting down some parts of the car to make it kind of like that lightweight Subaru experience. I think would be pretty cool. And you can still buy like some older models, put in a JDM 207 EJ207, and then put in a big turbo like a FP Red or FP Black or your GT6266s or whatnot, and that will make it a bunch of power, and it would be very lightweight. Now obviously you might eventually gut it out too much where your kids won't be able to sit in, but it's all in fun, right? Next is the Mitsubishi Lancer. So the big problem with them, let me take a break here, hold on. Sorry, I've been talking for an hour straight. So the Mitsubishi Lancer Evo series is a very good series. It's something you got to take seriously when you're looking at the Subarus. But I think the one that really makes a lot of sense is the Evo 10s. So the Evo 10s, you could buy them GSR or MR. The GSR is the manual. The MR is the dual clutch paddle shifters. And I think the MR makes a lot of sense here for the very simple fact that they're very cheap. If you're buying one of these with a loan of like 30, 40 grand, I mean, you're going to have plenty of money to swap out the clutches to, bigger clutches or race clutches that would last quite a bit longer. The Evo 10s take a lot less out of the engine to make the same power as the STIs and so on. And I think that if you're trying to buy something a little bit more reliable, closer to the Volkswagens, but you want something a little bit more versatile in the corners and things like that, and with relatively the same utility as the Mark 7, I think the number one comparator would be the Evo 10s. Obviously a little older chassis wise, and they're getting kind of beat up on the marketplace. It's kind of hard to find a really nice one, but I have been able to find them, and they're sub 7 grand, so in that way they make a lot of sense. Looking at like a budget supercar option, and I'm just putting that out there. I mean, obviously, we were talking about Charger Hellcats and just modifying the crap out of them. Like, I basically showed you guys one car like that, so kind of take it with a grain of salt. But again, the Evo 10s, they make a lot of sense. 500 wheel horsepower. The only big issue with going these routes is with the turbochargers, you will kind of want to put an E85 tune, which means, you need a barrel of E85 at home every time you want to go anywhere. Can't really road trip them that much usually at that power. But again, they make a lot of sense for someone that has a lot of money in the back pocket, doesn't really want a supercar, wants something a bit more dailyable. And I know a lot of people that do this. If you want something a little newer and a little cooler, and I think that they will appreciate a little better, is the Ford Focus RS. Obviously the RS with the turbo 2-liter, just as reliable as the Evo 10s for big turbo power, but you get the all-wheel drive system that Ford developed, which apparently, supposedly, drifts more and is more cornerable, and you do have that hatchback look of the Golf R. In that way, it's kind of cool. You know, maybe it's too much of a Golf R. You might just want to buy a Golf R. If you want something a little newer, Audi RS3, that one is really cool. It's got the 5-liter turbo. I know a guy, he's got one of these. He's making 700 horsepower with pretty much nothing. They're really, really cool. The only thing is no manual, obviously. So that kind of sucks. But again, if you're looking at Evo 10 MR, you might as well get an RS3. Very cool car. Now, if you want something American, you know, you got your Cadillac ATS-V. I think the ATS-V will go up in value in the near future. But with the turbo V6s, you know, they're a little gutless for the weight of their car. Again, kind of RS3-ish, but rear-wheel drive manual. Finally, and this is kind of like a pick out of left field here, it's basically an SUV, is the Mercedes-Benz GLA 45. We never got the A45 hatchbacks, so the GLA 45 is pretty much your best bet for like a Mercedes counterpart of a Golf R. And I think it's a pretty good car overall, but I don't know any of the big figures on it. I've just been looking at it for last year or so. Not quite sure if it's a good deal. Finally, and this is really something I should have mentioned right from the get-go, is, hey, you just looked at a bunch of cars. You noticed that you can't afford any of them. You noticed you have a lot more time than most of us. Maybe you're, you know, on the food, what do you call that? You're on the food stamps, let's say. You want something that doesn't have the prestige of a Ferrari, that has the performance of a Porsche Turbo, that has the versatility of a Jaguar XKR, but has the reliability of some of the previous utility cars we were looking at. Those turbo boys, like let's say a stock RS3. Well, then you might be looking at the muscle cars. So the big muscle car question is, hey, listen, do you want to sacrifice a bit of cornering speed for a lot more reliability and just tunability? And a lot of people will say yes, and I think that's good for them. So I'm gonna just rapid fire some muscle cars that might be a good option for you. So the really first one that might be cool is the Ford Mustang GTs. So the GTs are cool because you got the S550, which is just stopped production, and a lot of them are around that kind of like $15,000-$20,000, which is really easy to finance. They make a lot more GTs than the other three, and so it's pretty easy to find them. The big thing with the GTs is that you could just plop in a turbocharger or a supercharger kit, and boom, 700 horsepower. The disadvantage with the GTs is that, you know, the manual transmission isn't the best. 10-speed automatic is really not great. And whenever you're going to tune them, especially the new ones, you need to actually take out the heads and put in piston rings on your pistons. So you got to actually take out a lot of the engine before you got that reliable supercharged engine. Now, in my opinion, the best GT they ever made was the New Edge SN95. This kind of era, the 99 to 2004, 5-ish. And the reason why I like these a lot is that, firstly, people sleep on the 4.6 4-valves. So you could get an SVT Cobra 4-valve or a Mach 1 or anything like that. And these things are absolutely slept on. You got the T5 transmission, which is really easy to upgrade and make tons of power and, you know, reliably use tons of power. And the SVT Cobra specifically has a lot of tunability with suspension and things like that allow it to really compete with some other cars on the track. So a supercharger kit is totally doable with these for really, really cheap. And yeah, obviously you do have to take out the engine and start modifying it a bunch. But again, you're starting with a $5,000 car. You could do anything you want with that extra 10 grand that you would do with, you know, you try to finance a Ford Mustang GT. So if you had to finance something about 25 grand, but you want a car right now that you can modify, you know, buying an SVT Cobra or a Mach 1 makes a lot of sense for some people, some very specific connoisseurs. Now, let's say you got a little bit more money and you're kind of looking into the GM platform. Now, obviously the LS is very good engine, excellent engine for making bunch of power. If you're talking about like plop in superchargers, I mean LS3 is the one to do it. People literally just take an LSA supercharger, put it on their Camaro, chip tune it, and boom, they're making close to 600 horsepower. So that makes a lot of sense for those kinds of people. Now, I would suggest if you're looking for something a little nicer than a SVT Cobra or so on, but a little bit more tuner friendly than your S550s, well, your Camaro SSs make a lot of sense, but specifically, I like the SS1LE. The SS1LE has everything that you might want out of a muscle car. It's got the suspension, trick suspension. It's got the tire width, the trick tires. It's got the TR6060 transmission, the best transmission they ever built, and it's got that LS3 engine. So all you do is you plop in an LSA and boom, you basically got a ZL1. That's an amazing deal, I think. And even stock, the 1LE, I mean, beautiful car and very, very fast on the track. Basically a budget Z28. If you remember that 427 Z28, well, there you go. This is a budget version of it. And it'll be close to, kind of right between the Challenger SRT8s and the S550 price range. And I do think they're going to go up in value overall because they're that kind of like trick package Camaro SS. Usually Camaros keep their value quite well. That's why I had to suggest the SVT Cobra, because the Z28s, they kept their value. Now, if you want something quite a bit cheaper than a Camaro SS, the Pontiac GTO would be kind of cool. They got that 6.0, so this LS2 engine. It's okay. It's a first rev Gen 4, and on that first rev Gen 4, you can take like LS3 heads and put on an LSA. That's totally doable. People do that on their Trailblazers, for instance. But the problem with the GTO is they just don't have that chassis that the Camaro has, and it doesn't take the same suspension and tires and so on and so forth. So in that way, they're a little bit limiting. But if you want something that's a bit faster than the GTs, the SVT Cobras and so on, takes power better, that GTO is a good like midway there. So I haven't talked about Dodges. I think Dodge is really kind of too ghetto for me. A Dodge Charger RT makes a lot of sense, but it's not supercar beater. A Dodge Challenger is really cool. It's got that manual transmission and so on, but again, too ghetto for most people. Not really a supercar beater kind of car. Where it gets interesting is when you buy an SRT8 or a 392 version Scat Pack and you put on a twin turbo kit. So these things will take the power. I think you need like very specific pistons for it to do the trick, because the hypertonic pistons are not that good stock. But once that's done, these will be basically mini Hellcats, and they're great. In that sense, they can make a lot of sense. But otherwise, I don't like the Chargers all that much. The automatics are really bad. The Mercedes automatics are just terrible. The 8-speeds are okay, but again, you got to modify them quite a lot before they make sense. With the manuals, Challenger manuals, TR6060, you can't go wrong. You put in Viper gear ratios or Camaro gear ratios or Z06 ratios, and boom, it's an absolute beast. And of course, I could always talk about the Chevrolet SS if you guys are interested in that. Hope you guys enjoyed. Have a good day.